The Pac-12 has been one of the most entertaining conferences to watch this season. My favorite, personally. And with this conference being so entertaining, there's been a lot of good games featuring a lot of good teams. And unfortunately, when you have good teams, you get good games. But unfortunately, with there being so many good teams in this conference this season, they're now starting to beat up on each other. And it's gotten to the point where the Pac-12 playoff hopes are pretty much over. Their best chance is USC with one loss. USC does have a chance to get to the playoffs if they win out. Their last two remaining games are against UCLA and against Notre Dame. Now, both of these two teams are ranked. So, you beat them, you boost your resume up, you have the wins against teams ranked inside of the playoff rankings. Then, if you can win your conference championship, rather that be against Oregon or whoever, I think that USC, if they can remain at only one loss, they can get in if they win out and they win this conference. Now, who are they going to get in over? That's a different conversation. But I do think that the committee is going to award conference champions. I don't think that a one-loss USC that wins the Pac-12 is going to get looked over for a one-loss Tennessee squad that didn't make it to the conference championship. But we have seen a lot of craziness play out when it comes to the committee over the last couple of years, so you never really know. But really honestly, do you even trust for USC to be able to win out? Because, I mean, they lost by 1 point to Utah already. And this team is pretty flawed. And many people, when you listen to them talk about Trojans football this year, they seem really surprised when they think about where this football team is at this point of the season. If you would have told some people that USC was going to be, 9-1 at this point, some people probably would have been a little shocked. Because we talk about how the offensive line depth hasn't really been there. The depth on the defensive line hasn't been there. So a lot of people have questioned the depth that USC has had up front. Not just that, but their defense at times can be too turnover dependent. However, Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley and this offense has been absolutely fire. Caleb Williams looks like he's a Heisman finalist in my opinion. Even though you did lose your star running back and die, I think that USC is going to be able to have some guys in that running back room be able to step up and pick up the production there. So for Utah, who is the second other team who has the second best chance of being able to get to the playoffs for this conference, their path isn't as set in stones as USC. And I just said, even if USC wins out, I think they would get in. However, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the committee thinks. However, I do think that the Pac-12 being so strong this year, I think gives USC a really good chance of getting in. However, if USC has to be discussed with one loss, what makes you think that Utah has a path at 2 losses? LSU having 2 losses is different from the 2 losses that Utah has. Because, yes, both of these 2 teams have losses against unranked teams, or I don't think LSU has an unranked. LSU's loss came against Tennessee at home, and then they lost to FSU at the start of the season. Okay, yeah. And then you look at Utah, week 1, they lost on the road to Florida, and then they lost to USC. Well, no, they beat USC. They lost to UCLA. That's who it was. So they got 2 losses. And plus you have the loss to Florida earlier in the season. Like, I don't think the committee is going to give Utah a nod over anybody, even if they do win the conference. I mean, you already have 2 losses. We barely want to put LSU in if they win out. So what makes anybody think that the Utes are going to be able to get in, even if they can win the Pac-12 and beat Oregon this weekend? Which they have to beat Oregon on the road. So we don't even know if Utah is even going to be in position where they even have still 2 losses. They probably could have 3 or 4 by the time we get to the selection show and the committee decides on the 4 teams who are going to get in this year. I look at Utah. This team is pretty good, but they had some hiccups this season. You had the loss against Florida. You shouldn't have lost that game. Utah's hopes of making it to the playoffs were over when they lost to UCLA. So I don't really think that Utah has a shot at getting in regardless of what happens. I mean, even if Georgia suffers a loss and Ohio State suffers a loss, you're still going to have to worry about Michigan. You're going to have so much chaos happen. And even if that chaos happens, you're probably going to need another team or 2 to drop another game. I don't really see a path for Utah getting in with 2 losses, regardless of what happens. USC, on the other hand, if they can win out, they beat UCLA, they win against Notre Dame, you got your 2 ranked wins there. You can win your Pac-12 championship, you have your conference championship there. At that point, you're going to have 2 SEC teams that you have to worry about. And we all have a feeling that 2 SEC teams are going to get in, barring something catastrophic happening. So either Georgia's going to get in. We know they're pretty much a lock. And it's either going to be LSU or Tennessee. If LSU wins the SEC championship, they're probably going to get in. If they lose, we're probably going to see Tennessee. So at this point, you're down to 2 spots because the SEC already has 2 spots on reservations. Clemson looks done. I'm not counting them out, but I just don't think their schedule and with how the ACC has been this season is going to be able to catapult them back into the top 4. So I think that if this is a head-to-head argument and the last spot is coming down to a 1-loss Clemson and a 1-loss USC, you're giving it to USC easily. Tougher schedule, better conference, okay? Even if Clemson is able to win their conference, I just don't really think that winning the ACC means that much this year. That conference hasn't really been great. So I think that the Pac-12 champion over the ACC champion probably favors the Pac-12 champion. Now, what about the Big Ten? Okay, because the ACC, outside of Clemson, maybe UNC, you don't really have to worry about anybody. But the Big Ten, you got Ohio State and you got Michigan. Both of those 2 teams are about to play in a couple of days. So eventually, one of those 2 teams are going to end up with their first loss of the season. Maybe at that point, barring what happens this week if they don't lose. So you probably have to think that that's going to be an elimination game. However, I do think that there's a chance that we could see 2 Big Ten teams into the college football playoffs. I'm not going to rule that out. However, if we're going based off just this situation, this hypothetical scenario, let's say one of these 2 teams loses, the other goes on to win the Big Ten. The Big Ten has a spot at the table. Okay, so now you got 1 spot. I think that spot is either going to go to USC or you need TCU to lose somewhere down the stretch. And I do think that TCU is more than capable of being able to fall somewhere down the stretch versus rather it be Baylor or in the Big 12 championship. But for right now, it looks like for USC and the Pac-12 to get into the playoffs, they need a lot of help. And they need a lot of things to happen. I mean, you need LSU to lose to Georgia, or you just need LSU to take another loss in general. Then you probably would like to see Clemson suffer another loss just because you just would not have to worry about them at all if they take another loss. But if they do remain with one loss, they could kind of throw a wrench into the decision there. So then you got Bama. Oh, I almost forgot about Bama. Yeah, they're there. I don't think the committee, is going to put a 2-loss Alabama team in, regardless of what happens. I mean, yeah, you do have some good wins, but I just don't think Alabama at 2 losses, you could really justify that over a 1-loss Pac-12 champion in USC. So I don't really think USC fans have to worry about Alabama. Now, we already talked about LSU and Tennessee. So really, the Pac-12, they don't really control their own destiny. You're going to need USC to win out. And honestly, I don't know if they're going to be able to win out. I think that with how this conference has went this season, we're going to continue to see them beat up on each other, and USC is going to lose somewhere within the next couple of weeks. I don't know if it's going to be in the Pac-12 championship. I don't know if it's going to be against UCLA, but I do have a feeling that this team is going to slip up somewhere within the next couple of weeks. So I don't really think that the Pac-12 has a shot at getting into the playoffs this season. Yes, USC is still in the conversation. They're still in the race. However, the chances of USC being able to win out, I think, are really small. Really small. Especially if they have to face Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. I probably would take Oregon. But this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in to this episode. Make sure that you guys follow me on all of my social media platforms. You can follow me on Twitter at JT__ and on Instagram at JT_. Make sure that you check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. Wherever you get your podcast from, the JT Sports Podcast is available. Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon. Make sure that you go ahead, check out the JT Sports Podcast, and leave a 5-star review. I appreciate you guys for listening to this episode of the JT Sports Podcast, and I will see you guys